You're listening to How to Stan, the podcast all about both specific fandoms and fandom culture as a whole. For more information about the show and the other show that I do, 17 Karat K-Pop, visit 17karatkpop.weebly.com. You can also go to 17karatkpop.weebly.com/how to stan for more specific information about this podcast. Enjoy the show. Billie Eilish, Halsey, Lorde, Post Malone, Phoebe Bridgers, King Princess, Lil Yachty, Yundolf, Cardi B, Trinidad James, Quincy Jones. I could go on and on. What do all these artists have in common? They have all been accused of being industry plants. What does that even mean? Where did that term come from? Is there absolutely any evidence to support that claim that their backstories were manufactured? That's what we're going to dive into in today's episode. Talking about some examples of times when fans have suddenly speculated about the true backstories of their favorite artists who claim they started from the bottom. What makes this conversation difficult, aside from the emotional aspect of it, is the lack of a concrete consensus about the true definition of an industry plant. Over time, it's taken on different forms. Rolling Stone calls it, quote, an artist who has label backing but presents themselves as self-made. YouTuber for the channel Progress, John, said, quote, snapped up by a label before having a chance to develop a sense of agency or artistic identity. The New York Times said it's, quote, the catch-all slur among music fans for someone undeserving of their buzz and opportunities. The founder of Fake Shore Drive, Andrew Barber, said, quote, just a way to kind of explain artists that would come out of nowhere that weren't agreed upon by the blog delegation, that all of a sudden would skyrocket, get a bunch of money behind them, and then get all kinds of press and be lauded over. Complex has said it refers to, quote, artists who are plucked out of obscurity and given a new sound and aesthetic at the direction of their record label, then jammed down the throats of consumers through avenues like playlists and radios. Noah Calvin Bever, former CCO of Complex, called it, quote, an artist is on the radar more than people feel they deserve to be. Baby Goth, who has been accused of being a plant herself, said, quote, I define the term industry plant as an artist who was created by a label to push their own propaganda, a certain sound or image that didn't already belong to that artist, kind of like a puppet, and the label is the puppeteer, unquote. I could go on and on, the point being that the typical definitions of an industry plant revolve around feelings of betrayal, a sense of being lied to by their favorite artist who acts like they really worked their way up, they're very self-made, they have this underdog story of success that would have never happened without just their grit and determination, and they deserve the success they have now. And then the plant accusations refer to when people think that whole backstory is just kind of a marketing ploy, and that really from the get-go they had connections, they had a head start towards their current level of success that people feel like was not truly deserved, that they just blew up too fast as an artist. There's no way that happened organically. So people start to speculate who is pulling these strings. Before I share specific stories of times when someone was accused of being a plant, let's go back in time to the 10th century and then work our way up to the present day of terms like sellout and industry plant being used. In the 10th century, the word sell was used for what some historians think was the first time in the way we know it today. The word sellout was used in the context of a betrayal. A duke in Henry V expressed shock and outrage who decided to, quote, sell for a foreign purse, basically sell out for money. Classism has always played a role in this conversation. The composer Igor Stravinsky said in 1966, quote, let me say once and for all that I have never regarded poverty as attractive, that I do not wish to be buried in the rain unattended, as Mozart was, that the very image of Bartok's poverty-stricken demise, to mention only one of my less fortunate colleagues, was enough to fire my ambition to earn every penny that my art would enable me to extract from the society that had failed its duty. He goes on and on and on, but basically what he's saying is, unlike Mozart, who actually didn't make a ton of money from his work, I am going to make sure I get what I'm owed. Basically blaming certain artists like Mozart for their own hard times they got on, kind of in a way advocating then for selling out to make that money. Anyway, back in time to 1838, in the story Oliver Twist, Mr. Lively says, quote, "What a time this would be for a sell," unquote. And there are other examples in plays over time of the term being used kind of to describe this would be a steal, implying, this would be, it feels too good to be true how cheap or easy this thing is. The term sellout was also used in music over time. For one of the first noted times, it was a Western song that used it when talking about a train robbery. Again, using it like, this will be a steal in 1877. The term sellout more directly started applying to musical acts in the 1950s and 60s, and it intersected with conversations about politics more directly than ever before, starting in the 1900s. In 1906, actually, a magazine called The Tariff Act described, quote, "an ungodly and unblushing sellout to the Sugar Trust and to greedy manufacturing interests generally," unquote. Progressives would then use the term for political purposes in the 30s, especially during the period of the Great Depression, stock market crash, etc., and it then was co-opted by labor union movement supporters and became a part of their lexicon. Conservatives did use the term too, but in very different contexts, like saying withdrawing from Vietnam meant the US sold out, using the term to apply to things like international conflicts. So politicians were using it more and more while it started catching on with musicians. In the 1950s, it was referring to ticket sales. This was especially an accusation made against black performers who thought that their fellow black performers were selling out, basically code switching, and they would kind of shame those people for changing who they authentically were to cater to white audiences and what they thought would be quote-unquote palatable to them. In a very prominent example of this critique, John Hammond, the civil rights activist and music producer, criticized Duke Ellington for, quote, "losing the distinctive flavor his music once had, both because of the fact that he has added slick musicians to his band and because he himself is using composers for commercial reasons," unquote. Ellington responded by calling Hammond an ardent propagandist. So over time, the term has been used, constantly intersecting with conversations about race and politics. The rise of folk rock caused a big backlash from these, I guess you could call them purists of the folk genre, who did not like artists like Bob Dylan for popularizing using rock elements and incorporating more of a rock sound into folk songs. In a 1965 interview, Dylan actually, when he was listing all the different names he'd been called throughout his career, one of the names when he was listing insults he's been called was sellout. He treated that as a very dirty word. In the 80s, that term seemed to really catch on a lot in the media because those who grew up hearing the word in the 60s were now the people in their 20s writing for these publications and reviewing and commenting on and directing the conversation about music. So the term persisted. But in 1984, the term felt overused already. It seemed to really annoy writers. Harper's actually said it was, quote, "an old Stalinist term, redolent of class struggle," unquote. But it came back around because the punk rock scene rose up in the 90s, and the word became widely used again to refer to acts who seemed to sell out for this punk rock trend. Probably not coincidentally. Yet another concept that intersects with how this term was used is the sex of the person it is directed towards. Because not only was this a time in the 90s when punk rock was on the rise, but so was the rise of female artists and female bands. You may have noticed that as I was listing prominent examples of artists nowadays who have been accused of being plants, a lot of them are black and or female. However, some white men also got caught up in the accusations. Moby was called a sellout when his album came out in 1999 called Play, because every track on it was commercially licensed. That album actually did really well. It was at a time when Moby's career was on the downswing. Things were not going well. His last album had tanked, but Play was an incredible revival and so critically acclaimed. But at the same time, critics seemed to be shaming the decision to be quote-unquote a sellout. It was a time in hindsight that was more pivotal during this conversation than I think people realized at the time, because 1999 was also the year when, basically the predecessor to iTunes and Spotify, Napster came out and was gaining steam. So as that happened, so too did sellout accusations, a point we will return to later. A very compelling case was laid out in 2006 by Joanna Ruth Davis. She wrote The Scene is Dead, Long Live the Scene, Music, Identity, and the Transition to Adulthood, arguing that one of the reasons the sellout accusations kept coming is because these artists now had accumulated debt and they had to find a way to keep making money. This was especially pervasive in the 2010s when streaming services were really taking off. Physical album sales were tanking. So now people were questioning how much weight the phrase sellout truly carries anymore, because artists have to make that money somehow. So they're making it by partnering up with brands. So they're not so much anymore being called a sellout than they were before, when it was more optional to make money on the side with those sponsorships. Streaming totally changed that game. You've probably noticed by now that the recurring theme throughout this timeline is that every time the term sellout seems to be entering this obsolete state, becoming obscure, it comes roaring back somehow. That happened yet again because just when it felt like, well, isn't everyone a sellout because in the era of streaming they have to partner with brands to make money? Nope, the accusations continued and took on new meaning. So in the 2010s, the phrase was used a lot on hip-hop fan sites and message boards, accusing a lot of rappers and hip-hop artists of being plants. This is a big deal for those fans because a big part of making it in the world of rap and hip-hop is your underdog story. Your story of really rising and working your way up through the ranks after maybe selling a mixtape through the underground rap scene or whatever. The hustle is part of your identity and your story. So these fans in particular were incensed at the thought that their faves were making up that whole backstory and just handed success. These accusations went viral in threads posted by accounts like Kanye to the. That user posted in 2012 accusations against Lil Wayne, Waka Flocka Flame, and many other rappers. So if you want the SparkNotes version of everything I just said, the term sellout/industry plant became commonplace on message boards and when discussing rappers. The accusations have spread over time to be more and more about any artist people feel like doesn't deserve their success or didn't get it as organically as they claim to have gotten it. This often has implicit racism and sexism in those accusations in the first place. The term sellout seems to overall have changed over time to refer to industry plants now. Seems to be the same basic underlying accusation, just with a different context for the streaming era. And the term continues to be used in a way that offends many artists. Some poke fun at it. Rory wore an industry plant t-shirt on a cover of a magazine back in 2015. But aside from kind of winking and nodding at the accusations, artists more often than not today really take offense to that. Now let's get to some recent examples. Industry plant accusation story number 1, Clairo. This female soloist went viral back in 2017 with her song Pretty Girl on YouTube. But then suddenly people thought, did that really go viral organically? Or was someone behind the scenes involved with YouTube changing the algorithm for her or something like that? People started speculating because her dad has ties to Fader label, and he's been a marketing executive for Coke and Converse. So people have extrapolated that means her dad's in on the marketing business and therefore gave her a leg up. She responded to these accusations in a New York Times interview. She responded to this accusation saying, quote, "At the end of the day, when people say, oh, she's an industry plant, I'm like, no, I just have representation, like every single other artist you listen to. I'm not the first person to get a manager," unquote. 2. Chance the Rapper. People grew suspicious after he had been releasing music independently for 4 years. And after just those 4 years, his album Coloring Book got a massive promotional push, possibly more than the promo push for all of his previous work combined. It skyrocketed his success. It really got people talking about him. That is when he became a household name. He opened up in a 2018 podcast that accusation of being a plant and this homegrown false image of him still gets to him today, and that a lot of criticism he can brush off, but that still gets to him. Number 3, Russ. Russ has often been the target of ire online, despite the fact he actually released his first album to SoundCloud in 2011 and was not signed to Columbia Records until 2016. Nevertheless, people felt like when they heard the name Russ suddenly everywhere in 2016, something suspicious had happened. The suddenness of the fame, at least in the public, caught fans off guard. Russ responded, not directly, but through music, in his single that he released in 2016 called Exposed. Number 4, Her. This was very, very recent. One of the most recent accusations. Rumors started circulating online that her story was suspicious because of all of her success. So she posted an Instagram story saying, quote, "I've seen many bands and artists with a small amount of followers sell out Madison Square Garden and headline some huge festivals. Y'all think everybody's underrated or an industry plant with massive success outside of Instagram. Y'all got the game twisted," unquote. Number 5, Baby Goth. YouTuber John from that YouTube channel I mentioned earlier called Progress did this deep dive video into Baby Goth's backstory, trying to figure out why she was signed to Republic Records when all she had on her resume was a feature on a Trippie Redd mixtape and had not released a single solo song, but was already signed to Republic. So he quote-unquote exposed her past as a singer Bria Bueno and speculated that Republic was just taking this quote-unquote failed pop act and giving her a total makeover. Baby Goth responded in an interview saying, quote, "I was also labeled a plant because a YouTuber created a video about me and he had at least half of the facts wrong. Me and an ex-coworker reached out to him requesting he remove the post because it had contained so much false information. We offered him my very first interview in exchange. He refused because he already had views on the video," unquote. Number 6, Tramp Stamps. The Tramp Stamps first came onto the scene in November 2020. 3 girls who say their backstory is just, quote, 3 girls got drunk at a bar and wrote a song, unquote. They really went viral on TikTok. They have a very pop-punk sound, very much that kind of emo sound that is really re-emerging in popularity this year. So some people speculated their image was contrived because it was way too trendy and too on the nose for this moment. They gained a lot of attention on TikTok for their song I'd Rather Die. As of recording time, that audio has been removed from TikTok. Rumors really started spreading from TikTok to Reddit, where a Redditor quote-unquote exposed them, finding proof that these weren't just some girls who organically went viral on TikTok, all on their own, showing that 2 of them had publishing contracts with a company called Prescription Songs. Someone else, quote-unquote, dug up the fact that their music is licensed through Cobalt Music Group, which the owner of Prescription Songs is a co-owner of. People also started suspecting that fan accounts for them, created this past spring, were sock puppet accounts, and not real fans expressing real love for this group. Tramp Stamps issued a scathing rebuttal on Twitter posted this past April, saying, quote, "The misinformation and lies that feed this cancel culture are so effing toxic. We are three women who have been writing and producing music for many years, busting our butts in the music business while building our personal careers. We all crossed paths and wrote together as a band for the first time in February 2020, and our unfiltered conversations together led to the songs you are all so pressed about right now. As soon as we started sending these songs around, just about every label A&R was wanting us to sign with them, but we decided to do something different. We chose not to sign with a major label, so we could have full creative control. We made our own label, called Make Tampons Free, yes, that's the name of the label, which is distributed through AWAL, which literally stands for Artists Without a Label. They go on and on to say they write, mix, and produce all of their music on their own, just the three of them. They confirmed that two of them are signed to Prescription Songs, but that being signed to a publishing company is not the same thing as being signed to a record label. They also said, quote, "It's flattering that you think our graphics are so good that we couldn't possibly do it without a major label. Shout out to our 21-year-old freelance graphic designer that Marissa met in college." They also alleged the claims were misogynistic, in part due to believing that their oldest member, who is 29, must certainly have a kid by now, because she's married and the next step is starting a family. So on many fronts, they slammed the accusations as both inaccurate and sexist. Number 7. This is a slightly different type of feud because it wasn't so much about his whole backstory, but about his claim his music was all authentic and he wrote it himself. But in 2015, Meek Mill tweeted, "Stop comparing me to Drake. He doesn't write his own songs. I do." Paraphrasing. So 2015 to 2018, there was quite a bitter back and forth feud, and different rappers' tweets and likes caused fans to see which rappers were taking whose side, Drake versus Meek Mill. Fans became super invested in this ongoing narrative that escalated into a series of diss tracks, but then they made up in 2018 on stage. Drake was on tour and brought Meek Mill out as a surprise. He posted that it was all good, so maybe this whole feud about ghostwriter accusations was, ironically, a ghostwritten plot point. It ginned up a lot of publicity. Anyway, that night, Drake posted that everything was suddenly all good between them. Quote, "This really gave me a peace of mind tonight. Healing and moving forward created one of the most electric and gratifying moments of my career. At Meek Mill, I'm happy that you are home and that we can find our way back to our joint purpose." Unquote. Number 8, the Linda Lindas. They recently went viral. This girl group, a rock group, ranging in age from 10 to 16. When they performed at the LA Public Library, a song that went viral called "Racist Sexist Boy," slamming someone who had been racist and sexist towards them. This performance was seen over 4 million times, causing their Instagram following to rise to 250,000. And they made fans out of Hayley Williams, Questlove, Tom Morello. I could go on and on. The Linda Lindas then went on to sign with Epita Records, and even got to make a cameo in an Amy Poehler-directed Netflix movie. So their career just suddenly really took off after that one viral video, and they got a record deal. People started thinking this was a lot of sudden fame for one song, and then they realized one of the bandmates' dads is a Grammy-winning producer and engineer, Carlos de la Garza, who has worked with bands like Bad Religion and Paramore. Paramore's lead singer is Hayley Williams, who is one of the artists who hyped up this video. We will get back to that in a second. I want to get to my last example, Billie Eilish. She had released 3 songs, including the smash hit Ocean Eyes, just on SoundCloud, before Interscope Records signed her. Then she had a huge meteoric rise in fame. One tour was her playing little concert halls. The very next tour, she was already performing in arenas. People felt like this meteoric rise was way too fast to be legit, and then people pointed out that her family has roots in the entertainment industry. Her parents both have connections. Her mom has decades of experience, both screenwriting and songwriting, plus her brother is both a songwriter and an actor. And some people further think something's fishy because, like the tramp stamps, they feel like she is too on the nose, too perfect for this moment, as this countercultural force, this carefully curated anti-bubblegum pop aesthetic artist who does the opposite of what is going out of style. These two last cases I want to break down further because they drive home my ultimate broad takeaways. Let's start with the Linda Lindas. What really interests me about thoughts of nepotism or other immoral decisions factoring into their sudden fame is that the definition of an industry plant, although, as I just explained, the definition of an industry plant has never been entirely concrete, on the whole, it refers to this underlying sense of betrayal and being lied to. But the Linda Lindas totally go against that definition because they've made no secret of the fact Carlos de la Garza is associated with them. In fact, they've brought it up in interviews. They've been able to work on music and record in a professional studio from the get-go. So if they don't make it a secret, does that even count as being a plant? Because that would mean there was some sort of covert operation to stop fans from finding out the truth, and that just doesn't exist in this case. Then there's the thing about Billie Eilish that I find interesting. This accusation leads to circular thinking, because think about it. If you were saying that there's no way a song could go viral that fast and lead to that much fame, and then it does, you're saying that could not have happened organically. But then if you keep talking about it, that's going to keep happening. People are continuously releasing more music on streaming platforms than ever. And so it's just mathematically a lot more likely these days that the artists who you see topping the charts will seem to have gotten there very quickly because of the instant release of songs on streaming services every day. So every time you question why an artist's song went viral, you're actually just bringing more attention to the song. Then more of their catalog gets attention. Then again, you're back to questioning how their fame is possible. Aside from that ironic, accidental, possibly promotion of the artist you're mad at, it also seems like the conspiratorial mindset is so close to being accurate, but also so far. If you're saying that an artist is too perfect for this moment, then your mind could go two different ways. The word too there is essential to understand this, because there are some people who will say she is perfect for this moment and she blew up because she is resonating with people, because she is this unsmiling, don't tell me what to do, bold yet honest and vulnerable, baggy clothes wearing, not down the middle pop sounding artist. She's the opposite of a lot of stereotypes about a pop star. So those people think she's perfect for this moment. Then there's the other track that's so close yet so far, where people think too perfect, and that there's no way there wasn't someone in a back room somewhere saying, here's what we need to do. We need to market an artist who's not going to just be swallowed up in all these others, but stands out from them. We need to shift our attention to a new kind of artist for this moment. So the fundamental distinction of perfect or too perfect for this moment comes with how much legitimacy is granted to how artists gain fame nowadays. And I think the too perfect mindset people are not fully recognizing how today's fame works, how quickly labels are ready to bank on a viral artist for one release, how quickly artists upload music, how many artists can independently go viral because they just release their music on social media, how the pipeline to stardom is not as full of gatekeepers as it used to be. So the difference comes down to a fundamental difference in how the current music industry is interpreted. So my take on this, I personally am of the mind that throughout history, on rare occasions, an artist may have been quote-unquote a plant. But I think all the artists I talked about today, and the vast majority of artists overall, are not plants. They genuinely rose in fame. However, that thought can coexist with the thought that certain artists got a leg up. If you know people in Hollywood, of course that's going to help you. If you have access to a professional studio, of course that's going to help you. If you network well and live in LA, of course that's going to help you. If you get a famous feature on your record, of course that's going to help you. Even if it's unintentional. If people know your parent is someone who works for this brand or this higher up place, of course that might factor into them wanting to sign you to a label and seeing that connection as a potential future moneymaker for them. Of course there are different levels of access to becoming so famous. That does not mean they were planted, because to me this conversation about plants implies that these artists were from the get-go given an image, told what to say and do, and don't deserve an ounce of the credit they get for their success. Do some artists, more than others, deserve credit because they surpassed hurdles on their way to fame that others didn't? Sure. But the term plant really feels so reductive to artists' own hard work. And I would love to distinguish clearly the conversations that have been muddled together, which are how much artists have to work hard to make a name for themselves and what factors play into their ability to make a name for themselves in this conversation about a totally manufactured identity and undeserved fame. I would love to distinguish those conversations because we can talk about privilege and access to resources to become famous without alleging that they deserve no credit for their success or had no individual autonomy behind their fame and their music. And I think that should become clearer, and the term plant should be obsolete more and more in this streaming era, where artists can grow popular by being their true selves. They don't need to get fame by having this manufactured image. They can just be themselves. And so the same reasons you think an artist like Billie is a plant is actually just the reason why she's not, and why she has this organic popularity, because she can be the perfect artist to resonate in this moment without that being the deliberate intent of her work. The intent factor here is where things get conspiratorial, and I would argue unnecessarily so. So why does this word still persist? Why is this phrase still used? There are 5 main reasons, I think. One is that conspiratorial thinking is flourishing now. Whenever there's a gap in knowledge about anyone's backstory, in the age of the internet, that feels wrong. Like, we should know everything in the age of the internet. And so that doesn't sit right with people. So rather than accept a mystery, people want to fill in the gap in their knowledge, so they create their own narrative. Some also just get a kick out of it. It's fun spreading rumors and gossiping, and you can't prove a negative after all. For example, the IGN user Dizzy41111 started this viral thread in 2012 accusing Trinidad James of being a plant. When asked how he got famous, the user claimed, quote, "We don't know, dude. That's why he's a plant." When James was signed to Def Jam Records, this user posted, "What a surprise," sarcastically. So reasons 1 and 2, the age of conspiratorial thinking and a love of gossip. Reason 3 is just sexism and racism. How could this woman get so popular? How could this black creator get so popular? This desire to tear others down that subconsciously or not is rooted in sexism, racism, stereotyping them, and viewing them as too much against the expected image. Reason number 4 why this term persists: the streaming era, and the internet further just perpetuates these kinds of accusations for more logistical reasons too, in addition to psychological ones. The algorithms allow conspiratorial videos to really thrive. Other logistical changes have played a role here too, in changing who gets on the charts, which leads some people to be suspicious. For example, Billboard recently started considering streaming counts for songs and albums more heavily in chart rankings. With streaming factoring in more now, when you see an artist on a chart as notable as Billboard, and you've never heard of that artist, people have this automatic instinct of, how could they be on the list? I've never even heard of them. It comes from a very individualistic mentality about how the world works and how many artists are truly out there. And the last reason why I think this term persists is because some artists are fine with it persisting, and they actually are reclaiming and redefining the term for themselves, like Russ writing a song about it, or Rory wearing that industry plant t-shirt on a magazine cover, poking fun at accusations and hitting back at them. So over time, do I think this term will ever die out? Yes and no. I think the actual term industry plant might go out of style again, as it has in waves over decades. But something will replace it. Like how sellout was basically replaced with plant. Plant might be replaced with something else in the future, but it's probably the same basic premise, just repackaged. So my advice is to just enjoy an artist's work, not worry too much about what you don't know about their backstory. And sometimes if something feels contrived to you, then it doesn't resonate personally with you, and that's okay. You don't have to like that artist. It just feels like these claims are not really substantially doing anything, except just further helping word of mouth for the artists you claim to want to see the downfall of. And if you want to have conversations about this, please make sure that they are nuanced ones that can talk about who is quote-unquote self-made and what that really means without assuming that the artist is definitely some sort of puppet. Occam's razor, people. Occam's razor. Think about the least complicated possible explanation. These are artists who are making it probably because of a mix of connections and hard work. And that is possible. It doesn't have to be a black and white discussion like that. That is my take on and a brief history of that term. We will pick up this conversation talking about ghostwriters in a future episode. Until then, thank you all for listening, and I will talk to you all again very, very soon.